Hi everyone, it's me,
Hi
Mr.
everyone.
Alan again, and she is our guest today. She's Jessica. Hi Jessica.
Hi Alan and hi everyone. Nice to meet you all.
Hi. How are you today, Jessica?
I'm doing well.
Doing well.
Yeah, and yourself?
Are you currently in Cambridge or Harvard right now?
Yes, exactly. So I'm right now doing a graduate program in the Kennedy School of Government, a public policy program, as well as the business school.
Right.
So I just moved here around a week ago.
Yeah, because I know that the video you have shown before, you were in Tanzania.
Yes, exactly. So I was in Tanzania before because I used to work there.
Right.
And then now that school there's some in-person classes at Harvard, and so many of us moved here, even though some classes are still online given the pandemic.
So in the first term, you were studying online.
Yes, exactly. So the first term was completely online, but this
Mhm.
semester there managed to be some classes which are hybrid, and so some classes managed to like have students to actually go to the classroom while some students are taking it remotely, and then you do a rotation. And so that yeah, that's just to ensure that like the size number of people in a classroom is limited.
Right.
So I
Is
wanted
this
to like
kind is this kind of arrangement um, explained by the pandemic, or it is basically just like that?
Oh, definitely because of the pandemic.
Okay.
Otherwise, everyone would be in a classroom of like, depending on the class size, it could be from like 60 people to like 30
Uh-huh.
people to maybe like 80 people. But because of the pandemic, then everything has like shifted either online or a hybrid model.
Nice. So it is a full time, not a part time program anymore, right?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
exactly full time. It will be a full time 3-year program for me.
When I was watching your videos, in my mind, I always have several questions like, what are the challenges and what are the most difficult parts when you started to decide to study abroad?
Sure. I think for me, it was relatively easier because I had so my spark of trying like hoping to study abroad for like
Mm,
higher education
yeah.
abroad, especially in the US, was from an exchange program I did in my middle school
Mm,
at Deerfield Academy in the US. And so that was a very different environment from the traditional Chinese school environment that I was used to. So that was like the environment I was used to was like a classroom of like 35 students, which is actually already relatively smaller on the Hong Kong scale. And then students would just it's more of a question and answer format in a classroom, I would say.
mm,
And then until I went to Deerfield Academy, I was just amazed by how it's a much first a much smaller classroom, and then there was actually a lot of like interactive discussions within the classroom. And so that kind of environment just started making me think about maybe that's type of the model that I would want to be part of as I go further down my education. So
mm,
much more interactive, a lot more um, yeah, back and forth discussion. And
mm,
so that's sort of where I started thinking about it. And I think after my Form 5 HKC education, I went to Maple United World College where I did the IB program. And so because I switched to an IB program, that actually helped me a lot, I think, in applying to schools abroad because the international baccalaureate studies are
mm,
much more widely accepted
mm,
in the West. For me, I mainly applied to the US.
mm,
And so I think that switch again helped me a lot in helping me get into schools abroad. But I think that I would say then what's left as the biggest challenge then I think was first getting used to first the international baccalaureate system
mm,
itself after just being in the local traditional system for my entire life. And so I remember like trying to do like going from like a lot of multiple choice question like black and white answer to just like
yeah.
writing paper. And I
Yes.
remember like doing a chemistry. I was asked to like write a report after like an experiment in a chemistry class. So I was quite surprised because I thought like, isn't chemistry just like black and white, like you know exactly the formulas and you know what to say about it. But then I had to like start writing about, you know, reasons and like why I think like a certain experiment didn't work and didn't work. And so from like, yeah, that angle took me some time to get used to. And I would say the second difficulty was just, I think, also just doing SATs, SATs and your personal statement. So the different things that a US application would entail. And I think relative to the UK application, I think it took more time because you would definitely need to prep quite a bit for the SAT standardized exams, and then do a lot more.
At least a few months.
Yeah, exactly. It's at least a few months, and sometimes people take like more than once to make sure you get the best grade. And so I think just balancing that, writing your own story, and then also juggling with your school exams, internal exams, as well as like extracurricular. I think that was like quite an intense period, I think.
But do you need to convince a lot? That do you need to convince your parents to help you to study abroad, or they're mostly quite supportive about your decision?
Yeah, I was really lucky to have parents who were extremely supportive, and so they definitely wanted me to just pursue the type of education that I really look forward to. And so yeah, I think they were very supportive overall. And I think so what was interesting was my two sisters, their older sisters, they both went to the UK, and I chose the US route partly as well because I wasn't exactly sure what like specific topic I wanted to study. So for example, my older sister did a law degree. So I think that makes sense, where you specialize right away. Whereas for me, I was quite interested in a lot of different like social science things. So I was interested in a bit of economics, to history, to a bit of politics. And so actually the major that I ended up choosing, it's called industrial and labor relations, but essentially it's sort of a good mix of a bit of like history, politics, economics, with a bit of focus on the labor side of things. So that was like a really interesting.
What did you learn in that program?
Sorry?
Any idea what kind of subjects do you actually learn in this school, like in this program?
In this program, yeah. So it's a mix of a bit of everything, right? So we did, for example, economics, but it would be like labor economics. We did some history, but it would be labor history. And then we definitely did something like even more on the HR side of things. I think like a basic like human resources class, and then something to like basic data analysis as well. So it's just like a good mix of, and then we did like a law class 101 as well. So a good mix and taste of these, I would say like, yeah, more similar to social science courses, which I think was a good dip in everything. And at the same time, I was also lucky to be able to not just take classes in my college at Cornell. I was also so there are many other different colleges at Cornell, so I was also able to take other classes across like arts and sciences.
So they are joint programs.
So it's not a joint program, it's one major. I did a minor in business as well, but I was also able to take like electives in like different colleges. So for example, I took one class called human bonding, in another college, which was fascinating. That's actually one of the most popular classes at Cornell. Another really popular class, which I took as well, was called Introduction to Wine Tasting. And so that was again another really fascinating topic.
I love it.
Yeah, I like didn't think I would be taking it in school like ever before, like when I was in Hong Kong. So I think these are just like really eye-opening perspectives and experiences to have.
But do you have this kind of, well, you mentioned that you don't really have a lot of direction before you choose the programs, right? But now during the time that you have chosen those minors or the major subjects, do you actually have some idea already what do you want to do in your career?
Yeah, it goes a bit back to like, so my high school, I went to Lipo Chen United World College. So it was a school that really celebrated education, because of like sharing of culture, understanding like among different students. Anyways, takeaways, like through that, I started developing my interest in like economic development. That was something I wanted to do at some point in the long term. But during those few years in college, I thought like as I was gaining a bit like different skill sets in like social sciences, I thought like it would be important to also have like hard like technical skill sets after coming out of college. And so
Both of the
I
students.
thought about, yeah, sorry. So then investment banking was definitely a popular option to do that. I think just like really good training ground for a fresh graduate and like great exposure at such a young age. And especially I was able to work in the industry that I was interested in, which was like consumer retail. And so after college, that's how I sort of pivoted and then went into investment banking for like a year or two before then moving into development consulting, where I then pursued that in Tanzania.
Yeah. You have mentioned about the differences in learning style and the teaching style between US and Hong Kong. Um, even the differences already happened between the Li Puchin College and your high school, like your secondary 1 to 5, right? So, do you think these kind of differences will make you less competitive when you try to study abroad?
So I think yeah, I think for sure in the initial phases, it's definitely
Mm,
something you need to get used to. It's definitely a huge difference just based on our upbringing and the culture that we're used to.
mm,
It's very different. Like I think honestly, I still experience it today that sometimes like until I'm almost 100% sure, I would say like before that was like much more serious as issue, but until I'm 100% sure about
mm.
my answer, I don't want to speak or like raise my hand or like yeah,
Yeah,
say something, right?
yeah.
Whereas I think here it's much more encouraging where like if you have an idea, like it's okay to be wrong. Just like voice it out and that there could actually be like a very fruitful discussion among students. So I think initially that phase is definitely I would say yeah, for sure there's a disadvantage when we first arrive and it takes time to get used to it. But I think you can actually flip that disadvantage to an advantage easily if you can deliberately like know exactly what your issue is and then do as much as possible. For example, if that means you need to read a lot more just to like beef up
Mm,
your general knowledge so that you can have like easy discussions among a lot of different things, or whether
mm,
it's just like deliberately trying to like get your voice in there to start off with. I think like once you start saying something in like a first class on the first few classes, you then will feel much more comfortable to speak more in the subsequent classes. So see what is needed for you to like make yourself comfortable to speak more. And I
mm.
think once you actually start deliberately doing that, you might actually, because we're more deliberate about, we know that this is something we need to work on, that actually might turn into an advantage in the end.
Well, then that means it's a matter of how do you try, how much you try, and how much you can
Yeah,
adapt to a new learning environment, and how much
exactly.
you can actually throw away some kind of traditional way of learning and to
Mhm.
open yourself to the new learning style.
Yeah, yeah.
So one last question about in this episode. You've mentioned about the joint degree between the Harvard Business School and the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. How does this joint program works? How does it work?
Yes. Sorry.
How does it work actually?
Yeah. Um, so first of all, it's a program. So 1 year is in business school. Then 1 year is in Kennedy School. So my first year right now, I'm at the Harvard Kennedy School during the first year of my public policy degree.
Mm.
Second year, I would then move to the business school and then do my first year of the business school. So the whole year is going to be all business school classes. And then
Oh.
the third year is going to be a mix of both Kennedy School, like the public policy degree, as well as the business school degree. So then the third year will be divided into both degrees. So essentially, usually it takes 2 years to complete one degree. What this joint program does is that it then like shortens it from 4 years and combines it to 3 years together. And I should have mentioned earlier that this program usually it's for students who are interested in both the private and public sector. So potentially trying to come up with solutions that would require working across the private, public, as well as social sectors.
That is good. Thank you very much. And I think in this episode, Jessica told us a little bit more about the experiences and how the learning style between Hong Kong and the US, how to adapt to these kind of differences and how to adapt yourself to a new environment. And for the graduate students, they will also need to, I think they will also need to do some research on how many different kinds of programs or graduate programs now currently. You don't need to apply for a school only for one program. There are actually programs that got joint degree program. I think these students could try to open themselves to explore more as well. So now let's go to the next episode and see what are the challenges and what are the process of preparing for the admissions. And remember, if you have any comments or feedback, you may go leave your comments down there. And I'll see you next time. Bye bye.